I haven't taken Buckner Road since that night, and honestly, even driving past the turnoff in broad daylight makes my hands sweat. If you ever find yourself out on a back road and you hear whistling coming from the deep woods, don't stop to listen. Just run. My name is Mark. This happened last November. I was 22 at the time, still living with my parents in a suburb just outside a sprawling state forest. I had just dropped my buddy Jason off at his place. We'd been playing console games until about 2 a.m., and he lived way out in the sticks. The drive back was going to be 40 minutes of winding two-lane blacktop through thick pines. There were no streetlights out there and 0 bars on my phone. It was just my high beams cutting a tunnel through the dense fog that settled this time of year. I was tired, zoning out to a podcast, just wanting to get home to my bed. About 10 miles from the nearest main highway, I hit a massive pothole that I didn't see in the fog. The whole car shuddered. A minute later, the steering wheel felt mushy and started pulling hard to the left. I cursed under my breath and pulled onto the narrow gravel shoulder. I turned off the ignition and stepped out. The silence was immediate and heavy. It was freezing, the air thick with the smell of damp pine needles and mud. I popped the trunk and dragged out the spare tire, the jack, and the lug wrench. I was kneeling in the gravel, struggling with a rusted lug nut on the front driver's side wheel when I first heard it. It was faint, coming from deep in the timber to my left, a slow, melodic whistling. I froze, my hand gripping the cold metal of the wrench. It sounded almost cheerful, like a nursery rhyme. Maybe Pop Goes the Weasel, but slower, distorted. I told myself it was a bird, or maybe the wind catching a hollow branch just right. I shook my head and went back to work, cranking the jack. The metal squeaked loudly in the quiet night. Immediately, the whistling started again, louder this time, and definitely closer. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a bird. It was rhythmic, intentional, and the creepiest part was that it stopped exactly when I stopped making noise. I stood up, scanning the tree line. It was pitch black past the reach of my headlights. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the trees. "I got a flat. You okay out there?" Silence. I felt sick. A deep, primal urge to get back in the car overwhelmed me, but I couldn't drive on the rim. I crouched back down and started working furiously, sweat dripping into my eyes despite the cold. Clang! I dropped a lug nut onto the wheel rim. From the darkness, a sharp staccato whistle echoed back. Whit whit. It mimicked the metallic sound perfectly, but it sounded wet, guttural. I risked another glance at the woods. The fog had shifted slightly. About 20 yards back, between 2 massive oak trees, I saw something pale. It looked like legs just standing there, but they were too long, thin and gray, like birch saplings without bark. Panic took over completely. I tore the flat tire off and threw the spare onto the hub. I didn't bother lining it up perfectly. I just started jamming the lug nuts on. The whistling changed pitch. It wasn't a tune anymore. It was a low, vibrating trill that seemed to rattle in my own chest. The pale shapes moved. They stepped toward the road's edge. A figure stepped partially into the dim halo of my taillights. It must have been 7 feet tall, incredibly gaunt, dressed in rags that looked like a decaying red flannel shirt. It didn't walk normally. Its joints seemed to bend backward. I didn't even finish tightening the nuts. I threw the wrench in the trunk and slammed it. The noise acted like a trigger. The thing let out a shrieking whistle that pierced my eardrums and bolted toward the car. It moved unnaturally fast, loping on all fours like an oversized spider. I dove into the driver's seat and slammed the door, locking it just as a heavy weight crashed against the rear passenger side. I gunned the engine. The car lurched violently off the jack, scraping metal on gravel before the tires found traction. I floored it, tires spinning. I looked in the rearview mirror. The red blur of my taillights illuminated the figure standing in the middle of the road. It was just watching me leave. I saw its face for a split second before the darkness swallowed it again. It was smooth and gray, with no eyes, just a small, puckered hole where a mouth should be, vibrating intensely. I drove 90 miles an hour the rest of the way home. I pulled into my driveway, shaking so hard I couldn't get the key out of the ignition for 5 minutes. The next morning in the daylight, I saw 3 long scratches gouged into the rear door paint, right down to the metal. I told my dad a deer ran into the side of the car. I did some research online a few days later. I found an old missing persons case from that county. A hiker named David had vanished in those woods 10 years ago. The photo showed him wearing a bright red flannel shirt. I moved out of my parents' house 6 months later to a city apartment on the 3rd floor. I needed noise. Traffic, sirens, loud neighbors, anything to drown out the silence. Because sometimes when it gets really quiet late at night, I swear I can still hear a faint, wet whistling coming from the air vent above my bed. I still have the map stored away in a shoebox under my bed. I can't look at it. It's torn in 3 places and stained with mud that I'm afraid might actually be blood. If I hadn't listened to that ranger at the station, I really believe Chris would still be alive. But then again, if I had listened to the second warning, maybe we both would have made it out. It's hard to keep the guilt straight in my head. This happened last October. Me and my buddy Chris, both juniors in college, decided to skip the usual Halloween campus parties and drive up to Northern California for a hiking trip. We wanted something remote. We wanted to feel isolated. We got exactly what we asked for in the Trinity Alps. We pulled into the ranger station around 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday. It was way out down a gravel road and the place looked deserted. There was one car out front, a dusty government-issue Chevy. Inside, the air smelled like stale coffee and old paper. Behind the desk sat a guy who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s. His name tag read Davis. He didn't smile when we walked in. He just watched us with these heavy, watery eyes. We told him our route. We were planning a 3-day loop, sticking mostly to the marked trails. He nodded slowly, looking over our permit application. Then he grabbed a red Sharpie and drew a thick, jagged circle around a valley just next to our planned campsite for the first night. "Stay out of Miller's Sink," he said. His voice sounded like grinding stones. Chris, being the guy he was, laughed a little. "Why Bigfoot sightings?" Ranger Davis didn't blink. He leaned over the counter way too close. "The acoustics are bad. The valley walls, they trap sound. You start hearing echoes that don't make sense. People follow them and get turned around. We stopped looking for them after a week." It was a weird thing to say. Not bears or rock slides, just echoes. It gave me a bad vibe instantly, but Chris just shrugged and took the permit. We hiked out. The woods were dense out there, Douglas firs towering over us like cathedral spires. By the time we set up camp, the sun was gone. The silence was heavy, almost pressurized. We ate some freeze-dried chili and tried to joke around, but the ranger's warning kept buzzing in my head. Around 10, we doused the fire and got in the tent. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was dead silent. No crickets, no wind. Then I heard it. Snap. A twig breaking, close, maybe 20 feet from the tent. I elbowed Chris. He was already awake, eyes wide in the dark. We lay there, hardly breathing. Snap, closer this time. Then the sound of heavy boots dragging on pine needles. It circled the tent, slowly. It wasn't an animal. Bears don't drag their feet like that. Then a voice called out from the darkness. "Hello, anyone out here? I think I twisted my ankle." My stomach dropped. It was Ranger Davis's voice. It sounded weak, painful. Chris sat up immediately, reaching for the zipper. "It's the ranger out at the station. He's hurt." I grabbed his wrist hard. "Wait, think about it. What is he doing 5 miles out here in the middle of the night without a flashlight?" "He needs help, Mike. Let go." Remember what he said about the echoes, about bad sounds. That wasn't an echo, man. That was a person. The voice called again. Please, I see your tent. I just need a hand. It was compelling. It sounded so real. Chris ripped his arm away from me, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, and unzipped the tent door. He stepped out into the cold air. I scrambled after him, boots unlaced. Chris, stop. He was shining the light into the trees. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating thick trunks and hanging moss. Ranger Davis, where are you? Chris yelled. Over here near the ridge. The voice was further away now, deeper into the woods, toward Miller's Sink. Chris started walking. I followed, begging him to wait. We crossed the ridge line and started descending into the sink. The air instantly felt 10 degrees colder. The fog was so thick down there our lights barely penetrated 5 feet ahead. We walked for maybe 10 minutes, guided only by the ranger's voice calling out every few seconds. Almost there, boys, just a little further. Suddenly, Chris stopped. His flashlight beam landed on something that shouldn't have been there. A cabin. It looked ancient, the wood black with rot, the roof sagging. He's in there, Chris whispered. The voice had come from inside. Chris, don't. This feels wrong. This feels completely wrong. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run back up the ridge. Chris stepped onto the rotting porch. The boards groaned under his weight. He reached for the door handle. The door creaked open inward. Standing there in the dark doorway was Ranger Davis. But it wasn't him. The uniform was torn and filthy, hanging off a frame that looked too thin. His skin was gray, slack against his skull. And his eyes, there were no whites in his eyes, just pools of reflective black like oil. He wasn't hurt, he was grinning. A wide, wet grin that showed too many teeth. Did you hear the echoes? The thing that looked like Davis whispered. Its voice didn't sound weak anymore. It sounded like two stones grinding together. Chris screamed. He tried to backpedal, but he tripped on a loose porch board. Before I could move, a hand shot out from the darkness behind the ranger. It was long, pale, and had too many joints. It grabbed Chris by the collar of his jacket and yanked him inside the cabin with impossible force. The door slammed shut. The sound that came from inside wasn't a scream. It was a wet, tearing noise. I didn't help him. I turned and ran. I ran blind through the pitch black, smashing into trees, falling over roots. I didn't stop until I hit the main road as the sun was coming up. I flagged down a logging truck. The driver took one look at me and drove me straight to the county sheriff. They mounted a search, of course. They found our tent. They found our gear. They searched for a week. They never found Chris. They never found a cabin in Miller's Sink, either. They said I must have hallucinated it due to stress and dehydration. But here is the twist that keeps me awake every single night. When I described Ranger Davis to the sheriff, the saggy eyes, the tired voice, he got a weird look on his face. He led me down a hallway lined with framed photos of past employees. He stopped at a black and white photo from the 70s. Is this the guy you saw at the station? He asked. It was him, younger but definitely him. That's Davis, the sheriff said quietly. He was the ranger out at that station 40 years ago. He went out on a solo patrol into Miller's Sink one night and never came back. They never found his body. I don't know who or what was sitting behind that desk when we checked in, and I don't know what took Chris. But sometimes late at night when the house is dead quiet, I hear a faint scratching at my bedroom window, and a voice that sounds exactly like Chris whispers, "Mike, open up. It's cold out here." If I hadn't been with Tyler that day, I would probably convince myself it was just a hallucination brought on by dehydration or panic. But Tyler was there. At least, the Tyler I knew was there going in. I'm still not sure who or what came back out of those woods with me. We were hiking in a dense stretch of state forest up near the northern border of Washington state. It's the kind of area where the trees are ancient and thick, and if you walk 10 minutes in the wrong direction, You might not be found for 10 years. Tyler and I grew up around here. We thought we knew the trails. We got bored of the usual tourist routes and decided to cut west off-trail, looking for an old geological survey marker Tyler swore existed. We'd been bushwhacking through thick underbrush for maybe 2 hours when the atmosphere just shifted. It's hard to describe. You know that feeling when you walk into a room where 2 people have just been arguing? The air felt heavy like that. The birds stopped singing. It got dead quiet. That's when we smelled it. Not pine needles and damp earth, but something metallic, like old copper pennies and bleach. We pushed through a thick patch of rhododendrons and stopped dead. There it was, a cabin. It wasn't some rotting lean-to hidden in the brush. It was a solid, dark log structure with a stone chimney. It looked totally out of place, like it had been dropped from the sky into the middle of nowhere. There was no path leading to it, no tire tracks, nothing. "Dude, check this out," Tyler whispered. He was always the curious one, the guy who had to poke the dead animal with a stick. I just felt sick. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and run back to the car. "Tyler, don't. This doesn't feel right." He ignored me, of course. We walked up to the small porch. The front door was slightly ajar. Tyler pushed it open before I could stop him. Inside, it wasn't abandoned. That was the first real shock. A cast iron stove in the corner was still radiating warmth. There was a half-eaten plate of eggs and toast on a small wooden table, a fork resting on the edge of the plate. It looked like whoever lived there had just stepped out for a smoke 5 minutes ago. But everything was wrong. The furniture, the utensils, the calendar on the wall, it was all dated. The calendar was open to October 1982. While Tyler was looking at a bookshelf filled with weird, leather-bound journals, I walked over to the far wall. It was covered in Polaroid photos tacked up in neat, obsessive rows, hundreds of them. I looked closer at the bottom row, and my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. The photos were of us. There was a picture of me and Tyler at the trailhead parking lot that morning, taken from the tree line. There was one of me tying my boot 3 miles back, another of Tyler laughing, pointing at a weird-shaped rock. The last photo in the row was still developing, slightly milky. It showed the backs of our heads, standing on the cabin's porch, about to enter. "Tyler," my voice cracked. It sounded pathetic in the silence. "We need to go now." He turned around, holding one of the journals open. His face had gone pale, drained of all blood. "Mark, these books, they're diaries. They're all written in the exact same handwriting, but the dates go back over 100 years. Snap. A loud, sharp twig snap from just outside the open door made us both jump nearly out of our skins. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate, and heavy. We didn't wait to see who it was. We bolted out the back door, tearing into the thick woods without looking back. It was getting dark fast. We just ran blindly, branches whipping our faces, drawing blood. I heard Tyler panting behind me, then a loud thud and a curse as he tripped over a root. I spun around to help him up. He was on the ground, looking back towards the cabin hidden in the gloom, but he wasn't looking with fear anymore. His expression was blank, totally empty. "Tyler, get up, come on," I yelled, grabbing his arm, trying to haul him to his feet. He pulled away from me violently. He looked up, his eyes wide and glassy in the twilight. "Wait," he said. His voice sounded totally flat, devoid of any emotion. "I think I forgot something back there." Before I could process what he was saying, something tall stepped out from the deep shadow of the trees right behind him. It looked like a man, but wrong. Too tall. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. It placed a gray, elongated hand on Tyler's shoulder. Tyler didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just stood up, turned away from me, and started walking back toward the cabin with the thing, moving in perfect synchronization with it. I ran. I'm not proud of it. I left him there. I ran until my lungs burned like fire and I collapsed near a logging road 5 miles away. The search and rescue teams found Tyler 3 days later. He was walking down the center line of the state highway, miles from where we entered, dehydrated but physically fine. Everyone was relieved, everyone except me. When I went to visit him in the hospital, he acted normal, too normal. He remembered getting lost. He remembered us splitting up in the panic when it got dark. But when I asked about the cabin, the photos, the thing in the woods, he just frowned. "What cabin?" he asked. He looked me dead in the eyes, and for a second, just a second, I saw that same blank, empty look from the woods. "Mark, we just got turned around in the dark. You're letting your imagination get away from you. Stop trying to scare everyone." He's lying. I know what we saw. But sometimes when I look at Tyler now, especially when he thinks nobody is watching him, I see him tracing shapes on his arm with his finger, like he's writing something over and over again. And the scariest part isn't that nobody believes me about the abandoned cabin off-trail. The scariest part is that I don't think the Tyler who came back is the same one who went in.